Amidst the turmoil of the war, last year's video of Ukraine's missile burning a powerful Russian battleship has been released. In the bloody quagmire of Bakhmut, it is reported that Russia launched fierce artillery attacks, forcing Ukraine to retreat strategically. The situation is extremely grim. Notably, the U.S. air defense Darling is said to be vulnerable to attacks on the Ukrainian front lines. Why is that? In another development, Chinese media criticized the U.S. for inflaming the crisis and adding to the suffering of the Ukrainian people. Meanwhile, the EU conveyed a message that it would be difficult to maintain a trustworthy relationship if China does not do one thing. What is that? Poland warns of the golden age of the West coming to an end if Ukraine loses to Russia. Kim Jong-un said that North Korea is sowing a terrifying seed for its adversaries. Philippines and the U.S. conduct live-fire military exercises. It is heartbreaking to see Afghan teachers crossing the river to get to school on tire tubes. The Songkran Water Festival in Thailand heats up again after the COVID-19 pandemic. Welcome to the international news program, featuring the tense and thrilling developments in the Eastern European battlefield, along with other notable news from around the world. Amid the ongoing intense fighting, a video related to the destruction of the powerful Russian battleship from last year has been released. A Ukrainian journalist called it the greatest naval victory since World War II. Journalist Yuri Butasov has posted a video of the launch of two RK-360 Neptune missiles, subsonic anti-ship cruise missile, edition, of the armed forces at the Moskva cruiser, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Historical video of the greatest naval victory after the Second World War, which we received from sources close to the Luch Design Bureau. Exactly 1 year ago, on April 13, 2022, at 14:10, a crew of the RK-360 Neptune anti-ship missile system of the Armed Forces of Ukraine launched two missiles at the missile cruiser Moskva, the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Federation. As stated in the UP material, sinking the Moskva, previously undisclosed details. How the Ukrainian Neptune destroyed the flagship of the Russian fleet. On April 13, the Russian cruiser unexpectedly sailed into the destruction zone of Ukrainian missiles itself. As soon as it was detected, two Neptunes were launched at approximately 1600 hours, which flew one after another towards the Moskva. One of the security officials texted up journalists that night, "The Moskva is done." The UK's Ministry of Defence has claimed in its daily intelligence briefing that Ukrainian troops have been forced to make orderly withdrawals from positions they previously held in the highly contested town of Bakhmut, and that the last 2 days have seen an intense artillery bombardment from Russian forces. Writing on Twitter, the ministry posted, "Russia has re-energized its assault on the Donetsk Oblast town of Bakhmut as forces of the Russian Ministry and Wagner Group have improved cooperation." The Ukrainian defense still holds the western districts of the town but has been subjected to particularly intense Russian artillery fire over the previous 48 hours. Wagner assault groups continue to conduct the main advance through the center of town, while Russian airborne forces have relieved some Wagner units securing the northern and southern flanks of the operation. Ukrainian forces face significant resupply issues but have made orderly withdrawals from the positions they have been forced to concede. The claims have not been independently verified. Russia can reconstitute itself as a serious threat to Ukraine in future despite the severe problems it faces in mobilizing troops, a US-based think tank has said. The Institute for the Study of War, ASW, reports that top Ukrainian official Alexei Hromov said Russian mobilization efforts are stagnating as people grow more aware of the rate of Russian casualties in the war. According to the ISW, Mr. Hromov, the chief of the main operational directorate of the Ukrainian General Staff, said the Volgograd region of Russia has only met 7% of its recruitment quota, while in Saratov, the figure has only reached 14%. He also said Moscow is creating alternative private military companies to fill the gaps, but said that will not be as powerful as the Wagner mercenary group in the near future. However, Ukraine and its allies must not underestimate Russian force generation capabilities in the long run for a protracted war of attrition, the official said. The think tank has previously made similar warnings. But it said the Kremlin has not yet undertaken that necessary reorganization of its war effort to effectively leverage economies of scale to support large-scale Russian force generation. Amid Russia's resurgence in combat, Ukraine has also been bolstered with advanced weapons from the West. Among them, the Avenger missile system, which is considered the crown jewel of U.S. air defense. According to Forbes, the first of dozens of Avenger systems that Washington has provided has arrived in Ukraine. However, experts point out that the Avenger has a major weakness, making it vulnerable to destruction on the harsh front lines in Eastern Europe. What is that weakness? Stay tuned to find out. In the 2016 guidelines, the U.S. military explained that the Avenger system is used to protect moving targets during stationing. The goal is to prevent attacks from fixed-wing aircraft, helicopters, and cruise missiles. The best feature of Avengers is its high mobility. As the brigades advance, the Avengers can also be deployed in parallel. In the case of far advanced units, the Avengers system or other short-range air defense systems, such as Strela 10 or Jeopard, may be the only effective means of defense against air attacks by the enemy. However, according to Forbes, these weapons still have disadvantages, making them unsuitable for deployment with mobile forces in the frontline area, especially in fierce fighting situations. The Avengers is a light, unarmored vehicle, so it is extremely vulnerable to direct attack, by small arms, or fire. Even a gunman just getting close enough can take down an Avenger system. According to Forbes, decades ago, the U.S. military was relatively subjective, when the Air Force was confident that it could control the airspace on any battlefield. The Army stopped developing new armored air defense vehicles and delivered most of the hundreds of unarmored Avengers to National Guard units. However, the war between Russia and Ukraine shows that the Avengers do not easily bring the advantage as expected. U.S. Army Captain Peter Mitchell told the Institute of Modern Warfare, "Current air defense networks are the result of being created 2 decades ago, with the primary objective of passive defense. Today, in the face of new threats, the military needs to seriously reassess the capabilities of air defense systems." The U.S. side advised Ukraine to deploy Avengers to escort convoys of command vehicles and artillery, instead of placing them in the same aggressive formation on the front lines, including tanks and combat vehicles. As such, the Avenger will keep its distance with fierce firepower in conflicts. However, in the event of an emergency, the Avenger may still have to move forward, taking risks, to protect the Ukrainian arsenal in the best way. With all the issues to consider above, Avenger is probably a pretty headache for Ukraine. Maybe that's why Kyiv has so far only deployed the Avenger in areas where major ground battles have not been fought. The United States has been fueling the crisis in Ukraine as it hampers peace there, while inflicting more pain on the Ukrainians, Xinhua said in a commentary on Friday. The Xinhua Post said, "The U.S. has not stopped fanning the flames of tension in Ukraine and hindered other countries from promoting peace talks. Thereby, Washington has been sowing more suffering for the Ukrainian people. At the same time, it adversely affects efforts to solve many other pressing problems facing the international community. As a result, the international community, especially developing countries, is increasingly pressing and criticizing the hegemonic and selfish behavior of the U.S." Xinhua stressed that while international peace and stability is the greatest aspiration of developed countries, the United States does not pursue it. They are the leading vandals and troublemakers today. China's state media continued to criticize. After the Ukraine crisis escalated, Western countries led by the U.S. imposed harsh sanctions on Russia, causing food, energy and other commodity prices to rise. Other commodities globally skyrocketed, causing difficulties for developing countries. It is clear that more and more countries are protesting the irresponsible actions of the U.S. and refusing to follow in its footsteps in punishing Russia. For years, American politicians have become accustomed to ordering other countries to act as they please. They need to recognize the change in positions of countries in the Southern Hemisphere and understand what is the reason behind such moves, Xinhua concluded. It will be extremely difficult for the European Union, EU, to maintain a relationship of trust with China if Beijing does not help search for a political solution to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the bloc's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, said Friday. "I would like to say this in all friendship, it will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the European Union to maintain a relationship of trust with China, if China does not contribute to the search for a political solution based on Russia's withdrawal from the Ukrainian territory." The EU's top diplomat had to postpone a trip to China this week after he tested positive for the coronavirus, according to a tweet he posted. Neutrality in the face of the violation of international law is not credible. We do not ask anyone to align with our own position. We simply ask to admit and recognize that in this case there was a serious violation of international law, the statement added. Borrell also called on Chinese President Xi Jinping to speak to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and provide more substantial humanitarian aid to the battered Ukrainian people. Borrell said relations between the EU and China have deteriorated in recent years due to a growing number of irritants, in particular China's position on the war in Ukraine and EU sanctions against Chinese officials over the reported mass detention and persecution of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. At the same time, we have remained committed to engagement and cooperation and recognize China's crucial role in solving global and regional problems. We do not fear China's rise. However, we know that the history of tomorrow's world will also depend on how China uses its power, Borrell wrote. Borrell said in published remarks he was due to deliver during a visit to Beijing which was cancelled after he tested positive for COVID-19. The end of a golden age may begin for the West if Ukraine is defeated in the war against Russia. Mateusz Morawiecki, Prime Minister of Poland, during an address at the Atlantic Council in Washington, "If we lose Ukraine, we will lose peace for decades. Failure in Ukraine could be the beginning of the end of the golden age of the West." Morawiecki said that Ukraine's victory, on the other hand, will be a guarantee not only of reconstruction, but of strengthening of our economic power. Poland's prime minister has issued a chilling warning about Vladimir Putin, accusing the Russian president of building an evil empire in the east, and claiming Russian barbarians represent a threat, not just to Ukraine but the entire free world. Mateusz Morawiecki took to social media a day after shocking images appeared to show Russian troops beheading a Ukrainian soldier. And although he did not specifically refer to the footage, his tone suggested it was on his mind as he also took a swipe at old Europe for failing to grasp the magnitude of the situation. The 54-year-old, who has been his country's leader since 2017, tweeted, "The evil empire has been reborn in the East. Russian barbarians threaten not only Ukraine. They threaten all of Europe and the whole free world. The North Korean government keeps working to make the enemies experience a clearer security crisis and create the feeling of fear and uneasiness among them until they abandon their aggressive policies," North Korean leader Kim Jong-un said on Friday. Kim Jong-un, affirmed that many enemies are imperiling the environment on the Korean peninsula and harassing the Korean people's peaceful life, with their inveterate policy of aggression and threatening military moves. North Korea's official KCNA news agency quoted the North Korean leader as saying after the first test of the country's new Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. The North Korean leadership will continue to constantly strike extreme uneasiness and horror into them by taking fatal and offensive counteractions until they abandon their senseless thinking and reckless acts. North Korea conducted the first test launch of its solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM, Hwasong-18, early on April 13. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un oversaw the launch, accompanied by his wife Ri Sol-ju and daughter Kim Joo-ae. His younger sister Kim Yo-jong, the deputy director of the WPK Publicity and Information Department, was also present. During the test launch, Kim mentioned with pride the significance of the test fire, saying that the development of a new ICBM will extensively reform the strategic deterrence components of the DPRK, radically promote the effectiveness of its nuclear counterattack posture. According to KCNA, the launch confirmed that all the parameters of the ICBM fully met the requirements, providing guarantee that it would serve as a powerful strategic attack means of greater military efficiency. In the central Taiwanese city of Taichung, Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen met fighter pilots who are often stationed at the frontline air base of Magong in the Taiwan Strait, thanking them for their hard work and for sticking to their posts around the clock. Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen on Friday also pledged to keep strengthening the armed forces. Tsai also noted that the Taiwan-made Tsinghua Indigenous Defense Fighters, IDF, which entered service in 1997, had been upgraded to more advanced versions. Reuters reported that Beijing's military activities around the island ebbed. On April 8, China began the exercises, including simulated precision strikes with bombers and missile forces, after Tsai returned from Los Angeles, where she met U.S. House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy, infuriating Beijing. China views democratically governed Taiwan as its own territory, a claim the government in Taipei strongly rejects, and routinely denounces high-level meetings between Taiwanese and foreign leaders and officials. Philippine and U.S. soldiers took part in an anti-tank live fire exercise in the Philippines' largest military base on Thursday, April 13, amid tensions with Beijing over the South China Sea. The drills are part of a 2-week annual bilateral exercise between Manila and the U.S., with this year's edition being the largest in scale yet, with over 17,000 participating soldiers. China's foreign ministry on Monday, April 10, criticized the joint exercises, saying they must not interfere in South China Sea disputes, much less harm China's territorial sovereignty, maritime rights and interests and security interests. Speaking at a news conference, Philippine Army Commanding General Romeo Brawner said, "The exercises that we're doing are all in line with the order of our president. For us to defend our territory and not give an inch of our territory." With the world's lowest birth rate, South Korea faces a looming demographic and economic disaster. To reverse the trend, South Korea's central and local governments are scrambling to provide payments and other benefits to anyone who gives birth to a child. Al Jazeera news agency on April 12 reported that in 2022, the average number of babies expected per South Korean woman dropped to 0.78, down from the previous record low of 0.81 the previous year. The replacement rate in developed countries, the number of births needed to keep the population stable, is typically about 2.1. According to Al Jazeera news agency, South Korea is not known for its strong social safety. Its social spending is among the lowest in the OECD. But even compared with European countries known for their well-developed social welfare systems, many of which have implemented their own baby bonuses in response to low birth rates, South Korea's schemes are generous and come with few strings attached. Since 2022, mothers have received cash payments of 2 million won, $1,510, upon the birth of a child, more than in famously socialistic France. Families receive 700,000 won, $528, in cash per month for infants up to the age of 1 and 350,000 won, $264, per month for infants under 2, with the payments set to rise to 1 million won, $755, and 500,000 won, $377, respectively, in 2024. Other benefits include medical costs for pregnant women, infertility treatment, babysitting services, and even dating expenses. But whether splashing the cash can in any way alleviate South Korea's demographic woes is unclear. For many South Koreans, choosing not to marry or have children is simply a matter of preference. In a survey carried out last year by the Office for Government Policy Coordination, 36.7% of 19 to 34-year-olds expressed no desire to have children. Some controversial remedies that have been floated by politicians include exempting men with 3 or more children from compulsory military service and allowing foreign domestic workers to work for less than minimum wage to alleviate the burden of housework. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol recently declared that spending 280 trillion won, $211 billion, on the problem over the last 16 years had been a failure and called for bold and sure measures to address the crisis. Professor Song De-yong, a social welfare professor at Incheon National University, said cash allowances were not a long-term solution. Child rearing is not a matter of providing financial support for the first 2 years of a child's life, Song told Al Jazeera. It is not possible to provide high levels of parental benefits until a child is all grown up. Former President Donald Trump waved at supporters as he arrived back at Trump Tower in New York on Thursday evening, April 13, after answering questions for nearly 7 hours in a $250 million civil fraud lawsuit against him by the state's Attorney General Letitia James. The questioning took place behind closed doors and has not generated the kind of attention that his historic surrender in New York City on separate criminal charges did last week. Trump, who is seeking the Republican nomination for the 2024 presidential election, will be asked about his business practices. The lawsuit accuses him and others of a decade-long scheme to manipulate property values and his net worth to obtain favorable loans and tax benefits. The dollar fell to a 2-month low against a basket of currencies and a 1-year low against the euro on Thursday after U.S. producer prices unexpectedly fell in March, boosting expectations that the Federal Reserve is near the end of its rate hiking cycle. The dollar index fell to 100. 84, the lowest since February 2nd. The euro reached $1.10680, the highest since April 1, 2022. The Producer Price Index, PPI, for final demand dropped 0.5% last month. In the 12 months through March, the PPI increased to 7%. That was the smallest year-on-year rise since January 2021 and followed a 4.9% advance in February. "We are headed back to a low-inflation world, that's the message of the market right now," said Adam Button, chief currency analyst at Forex Live in Toronto. "The next big trade is that the inflation scare is over. The single currency is being boosted by a relatively more hawkish European Central Bank that is expected to keep raising rates to tackle inflation. We have seen a dramatic swing in interest differentials in favor of the euro," said Ben Laidler, global market strategist at eToro. The combination of falling U.S. inflation and rising recession risks have driven expectations of 3 Fed interest rate cuts this year compared to further hikes from the still hawkish ECB. Fed funds futures traders are pricing for the Fed's benchmark rate to peak at 5.1% in June, from 4.830% now, before falling back to 4.34% in December. The ECB needs to keep raising rates given stubbornly high underlying inflation, and its next move could be either a 25 or a 50 basis point increase, Governing Council member Bose John Vassell said on Thursday. The next major U.S. economic release will be retail sales on Friday, which will be analyzed for how inflation is affecting consumer spending. Ladies and gentlemen, hundreds of migrants flocked towards the U.S. border from Mexico, turning themselves into U.S. Border Patrol in an attempt to enter the United States. In the border city of Ciudad Juarez, the migrants decided to cross after hearing rumors that the Border Patrol had instructions not to deport people and that they would be allowed to cross into the United States. However, Border Patrol reiterated that the conditions for crossing remain the same and that only those with an appointment process through the CBP-1 application would be admitted. Reina Fernandez, a migrant in the area, told Reuters the U.S. government app CBP-1 to apply for asylum has few appointments. She later turned herself and her children to the U.S. Border Patrol. Title 42 is still in force and they are not letting anyone through, said William Suarez, another migrant who decided to walk back to the Mexican side after realizing the rumors were false. Among the difficulties faced by migrants waiting for a chance to cross to the U.S. side is the fear of being apprehended by Mexican immigration institutions after the fire that killed 40 migrants in detention on March. For Olivier Dubois, head of Mexico and Central America for the International Committee of the Red Cross, said the fire tragedy was a moment to consider alternatives for migrants seeking freedom. Migrants in limbo at the shared border between Peru and Chile on Thursday, April 13, as Peruvian officials stepped up control at the frontier crossing to migrants seeking to cross through the Andean nation. According to reports, the Peruvian National Police has blocked passage to a group of undocumented immigrants in the city of Tacna when they tried to cross the border from Chile. Those affected include migrants from Haiti, Colombia, and Venezuela. "We want to go back to our country," Venezuelan migrant Minasca Nava said. In March, Chile's President Gabriel Boric said his government would strengthen border security in the north in an effort to reduce the flow of unauthorized immigration. More than 17,600 people are members of the 4 major armed groups and 23 gangs with which the Colombian government hopes to reach peace or surrender deals, 2 security agency reports seen by Reuters show. The newly updated figures, which have not been reported before, are an effort to understand the current composition of the groups, security sources said. The new figures are higher than that of previous official estimates, but are also a fundamental check on the group's own membership claims, which are often inflated, said the sources. They said the reports, which were compiled by the armed forces, will be shared with President Gustavo Petro and his defense minister at a coming security meeting. Petro has promised to end Colombia's 6-decade conflict, which has killed at least 450,000, through peace deals or surrender agreements, which would see criminal group senator and security expert Ariel Avila, who has seen preliminary figures from the reports, told Reuters that it was important to ensure that those who received the benefits of such deals were truly members of armed groups. Supporters of Argentina's VP, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, gathered on Thursday, April 13, to support her plausible candidacy in the October presidential election and protest his conviction in a high-profile corruption case. Hundreds of supporters of Fernández de Kirchner met in downtown Buenos Aires to protest a prison sentence against her and demand her to run for president in upcoming elections. "She's the best leader of the country, the only one who can take us out of the well we are into," demonstrator Mariano Dimitri said. Under the slogan, "Democracy or Judicial Mafia," the crowd gathered in front of the Supreme Court to protest a 6-year prison sentence and disqualification from holding public office for alleged corruption against the VP. In December, Federal Court 2 in Buenos Aires City found Fernández de Kirchner guilty as the criminally responsible author of the crime of fraudulent administration to the detriment of the public administration. Despite being disqualified from public office, the VP could still run in the 2023 presidential election as the conviction is not final. Argentina is heading towards crunch general elections in October, where the governing Peronist coalition is facing the real prospect of defeat. Bolivian journalists took to the street on Wednesday, April 13, to protest against a possible law that they say will curtain freedom of the press in the country. Journalists have dubbed Bill 305 a gag law, with some protesters taping their mouths shut outside Government House to denounce the legislation. According to local media, the bill includes a paragraph that stipulates action against reporting considered to promote racism or discrimination. Critics say such a premise could be abused to crack down on critical media. Government lawmakers deny that the bill is a gag law against media. In a very biased way, they, critics, are trying to make colleagues from the press believe something has been included, in the law, that puts a gag on their work, and this is not happening. I repeat, this wording comes from Law 045, Against Discrimination and Racism, and it was approved, discussed, and promulgated in 2010 administration. MC, ladies and gentlemen, in Afghanistan, a country engulfed in conflict for decades, education work is facing many difficulties, due to shortages in many ways. Reuters on April 14 posted extremely heartbreaking images. Every morning, the teachers of a high school had to cross the river to the school to give words to the students, on inflated carts. They keep making contributions, even though poverty persists. Every morning, the teachers of Billy High School in Afghanistan make their way to the river carrying inner tubes. They use them to commute to the school they teach at in the country's eastern Nangarhar province, paddling their rafts across fast-moving water to get to the other side of the 46-meter-wide river. There are no bridges or boats to make the journey easier, and for years, 12 of the 15 staff have used this means of transport, weathering higher water levels after rain. The school they teach at currently has 1,040 students, including girls attending primary classes. It was opened in 2004, but the Education Ministry told them just 3 years later the school complex was too dilapidated for use. There are only 3 classrooms left now, and most of the classes are held outdoors. "You can see the school building is damaged and all the windows are broken," said Noor Rahman, who has been teaching Pashto language at the school for 15 years. "We don't have enough textbooks, we don't have books for grade 9, 10, 11, and 12, he said, adding it has been 4 years since books were last distributed to the province. Teachers like Rahman have no other way to make a living. The meager salary between 6,000 and 8,000 Afghani, $69 to $92, per month is hardly enough to support his family, Rahman says, even though transport to the school is free. Life goes on anyway, there is poverty in general, he says. After decades of war, Afghanistan remains one of the poorest and least developed countries in the world. Its financial crisis has only worsened since the return of the Taliban to power in mid-August, 2021. E-commerce giant Amazon has entered the competitive field of artificial intelligence. It is working on a cloud service that supports apps for generative AI, which can create images or summarize text for users, among other tasks. Amazon Web Services announced the new platform called Bedrock on Thursday. It will use pre-trained AI models that will be available in a few months. Users will also be able to add their own data for customization. Company officials say there will be safeguards to prevent inappropriate content promoting violence or discrimination. Generative AI tech is a quickly growing field. Tech giants Microsoft and Google are developing their own products. AI Generator describes algorithms that can be used to create new content, including audio, code, images, text, and video. ChatGPT is a prime example of generative AI. Tens of thousands of revelers, including hordes of foreign tourists armed with plastic water guns, descended on the streets of Bangkok on Thursday, April 13, for the biggest traditional New Year gathering since the pandemic. Festivities for Songkran, a much-loved Thai festival sometimes described as the world's largest water fight, had been muted or barred for the past few years due mainly to COVID-19 restrictions. Travelers returning to Thailand, the tourism sector is helping revive Southeast Asia's second-largest economy. Revelers, many of them soaked to the skin, walked through a half-kilometer, 0.3 miles, long stretch in Bangkok's tourist hub of Kaosan Road, indiscriminately firing water guns and dancing to music blaring from curbside establishments. I feel good to have this festival back. Also, the economy got boosted. It's better than letting the city go quiet like before, during the pandemic, said a local participant Sudathip Wongsa.